Hey, thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, what are you going to talk about today?
So today I'm going to talk about automated email. We're going to have a look at 5 different ways that you can level up what you're doing with automated email.
Okay, so now you can share your screen whenever you want. Great. I want to be on the backstage.
Cool. So in this talk, I want to look at 5 ways to level up your automated email. So automated email is such a useful tool to really deliver a great experience for people who are on your email list. Um, but I wanted to look at ways that you could, maybe you've got some stuff in place and you want to take it further. I wanted to hopefully give a bit of inspiration for where you can go. So my name's Elliot Ross. So I work at a company called Taxi for Email, which is a tool that helps people put together their email campaigns, and then you plug into whichever ESP you want to use. So you can find me on social. So I'm on Twitter. I am Elliot, and also on Instagram and LinkedIn. So come and find me. So 5 ways to level up your automated email. So the first thing, and this is a big challenge when people are looking at transactional email or automated email, is quite often it's not actually owned by the marketing team, um, but especially companies that are perhaps startups or are more technology kind of platform based. What happens is transactional email ends up being owned by a whole bunch of other people. So it might be that the marketing team sends email that is more campaign based. But then if someone does an action on the website, for example, that's owned by the website team or the IT team or the product team or some other team. Even sales teams quite often send email. So the first thing to do to really level it up is to take ownership of it, or at least get in touch with all of the different people in your organization who are sending email. And this is quite a nice example from Amazon. And I don't really want to pick on Amazon too much, but I guess they're big enough, right? So these are 3 different emails from Amazon, and you can see that they're not massively consistent. Like the call to actions are all different shapes. So the middle one has a gradient on it. The one on the left there has a great big blue or green kind of box. The type is different. So on the right hand side, there's some stuff in Times New Roman, for example. The logos are all different sizes. So there's not much consistency going on. And that's because all of these emails will have come out of very disparate teams, sometimes even different agencies, different regions, all that kind of stuff. So I would say the first thing to do to level things up is to just get in touch and work out what email is going out there, and then start to try and make it a bit more consistent. Um, and my second point here kind of dovetails with that. So users don't really see one email, right? Like when they get an email, they don't see an email in isolation. What they see is a brand, and their view of that brand is the the sum of every different interaction they've had with that brand, whether it's across different emails, across different channels, across different experiences, where they've gone in store, all of that kind of stuff. They're engaging with a brand, they're not engaging with a specific email. So what we should do as marketers is we should look at what are all the different touch points that people get from our marketing campaigns and from the overall experience of interacting with our brand. Um, because that's how our users act, right? So if we send an email that says, hey, come in store and you'll get XYZ will happen, and then people go in store and it doesn't happen, like the brand is at fault there. It's not just the single email. People don't really see, okay, well, that would have come out of the email team and that would have come out of the social team. That's not what happens, even though we know that's what goes on. So looking holistically from what happens to the user, how the user sees your brand, I think is really, really key. And transactional emails or automated emails are very, very important here. So here's an example. These are some emails that National Geographic send. So one of the ways that I'd recommend that you get to a place where everything that you're sending is consistent is not only by communicating with the different people sending email, and maybe even taking control of some of the stuff that is coming out of perhaps the IT team, for example. It's actually building on that and using something called an email design system. Now, this is a whole topic in itself, but I'll talk about it for a couple minutes. So an email design system is essentially a bit like a modular template. And what you do is you build out all of the different building blocks that you want to use in your email campaigns ahead of time. And what that means is you can then document it and you can share that with everyone who is making email at your organization. So you can say, hey, we're National Geographic, and here is how we make email. These are the different shapes that you can use. These are the different things that you can do with email. And what that does is it makes a lot of the work that you do a lot more aligned. And then what comes out of that is it means that everything's a lot more consistent, the experience is a lot stronger, and then hopefully users are a lot more engaged with what we're doing. So this is the email design system that National Geographic use. So they've got all these different building blocks that they take to make their email campaigns. And what they do is they use Taxi, which is the tool we made, but also there's all sorts of different ways that you can do this. But basically you have your HTML with all of the different shapes that you might use. You can then put your content in, and then you can build out emails from a system rather than from scratch each time. And that means that you get this consistency. So you can see here, even just things like the call to actions are all the same. You know, they all coded in the same way. But even though the emails do look different, like there's different imagery, there's quite differing designs, there's still a family resemblance between everything that goes out. And that's what delivers that really strong experience for the audience. So I'd say that using an email design system is a really great way to get into a position where all of your work is consistent, not only your work, but everyone who is touching email in your organization. You can also take this outside of email, and you can then work into things like brand guidelines, for example, so that you can make it so that things like social are also giving a holistic experience. The third thing that I think is a really strong way to level up your automated emails is by using strong data. And what I mean by this is looking at the data that is available to you. And quite often there isn't actually that much, but if you do investigate further, there are some things that you can use. So historically, we've thought of data as, hey, so we know someone's first name, let's put that in there. And that's great, but there's a whole lot more we can do to make our emails more personal for people and personalized for people. So being smart about how we use the data that we have, I think, is really key. Obviously, in Europe, there's things like GDPR. There's also legislation in places like Canada and California. So do be aware of what you can and can't do and how you should treat people's privacy around this kind of thing, and how overt or covert you should be in tailoring stuff for people. So these are some examples from Pinterest, and they're actually the same email, but they're tailored heavily based on what Pinterest knows about the individual person. And Pinterest is able to pull on a huge wealth of data, because depending on how much someone uses the platform, they get really strong idea of what someone likes and what they're interested in. And then they can look at that across different users and a broader scale across different trends. And then they can say, hey, so you're broadly interested in men's fashion and this and that. So other people are interested in this. We've seen them interact with this, and then we can pull this stuff together. There's a great talk that Seth at Pinterest did at a conference a few years ago, and he said that almost every email that goes out from Pinterest to an individual person is unique to them. Like there's a huge amount of personalization going on, which I think is really interesting. And they saw that there was great results coming off the back of it, and it's all automated, like it's all put together in the platform. No one is coding up millions of different separate emails for people. So that's fine for Pinterest. Obviously, they're in California. They've got a big team. They've got lots of resources, that kind of thing. But what can we look at? If we're a smaller company, perhaps, or we've got less resources on our team, or all of this kind of stuff. Obviously, we need to pick and choose what we're going to do, because everyone doesn't have the time to do everything. So what I thought we'd pull out quickly is just some various sources that you could look at that you maybe aren't looking at right now, that you could use to start automating things in your email. So a classic place is the web browsing data, so what people are doing on your website. So that's not just people use a kind of they leave a digital footprint as they kind of move around your website, so you can kind of see what products they're interested in. But it's not just that, perhaps if people put something into their shopping cart but they don't actually convert, you could send an abandoned cart email off the back of that. Also things like in-store activity. If you have a loyalty program, that's often a great source of data to be able to understand what people like, not only on an individual level, but also on an aggregate level across a market. You can say, okay, cool. So people who like pet food also like other pet supplies, for example. So we can tailor that, and we can start basing marketing activity on the top of that. You could also do some fairly straightforward things, like just take an action like signing up for emails. If people have signed up for your email campaign, they're showing you that they're very engaged with your brand at that point. So that's a great opportunity, not just to send a confirmation email saying, hey, great, thanks for signing up, but also maybe we could put some offers in there. Or if they're new to our organization, they haven't really heard about what we're doing, we could start sending them a little sequence to say, hey, so here's what we're all about. Maybe you could put some discounts in there over the sequence to get them up to speed with what you're doing before you kind of put them into the big newsletter list, for example. Other things that you might know about people, so their birthday, for example, if that's relevant, you could start pulling in content based and kind of send an email saying, hey, happy birthday, here's an offer, for example. There's other preference data that you might be able to find and start targeting stuff based on that as well. Previous email activity is something that we overlook quite often, but I think that's a great source of data. So if people have clicked on a certain destination and you're sending travel emails, for example, you could start taking that and start tailoring the next email's content based on different locations that they were interested in, for example. Also, people do leave a bit of a digital footprint in their email. So, for example, most of the time we can tell what email client they're using. We could tell a rough location based on their IP address. There's challenges around that, specifically if they're using Gmail, we can't really do that. But you could start working out location, for example, based on that, and then tailor automated email accordingly. I think similarity to other users is quite interesting. So kind of looking at, hey, this person is showing these kind of behaviors right now, but we can see those behaviors in someone else 6 months ago. So let's take what the other person is doing now and start nurturing the first person to get there. Maybe start selling those kind of products, that kind of thing. Supermarkets, especially in the UK, do a great job at this kind of stuff. So they can, on aggregate, start to predict, for example, if someone takes some fairly strong actions, they can start to predict, okay, cool, so they're going to buy an animal at this point. They're going to start buying a pet. So we can start sending them, the information about pet-based products, or even taking kind of signals and then cross-selling things like pet insurance, for example. So there's a lot of kind of aggregate data that we could dig into there. It's all about mining that information. If you're running some kind of product, then taking signals from what they're doing in the product, I think, is a really good signal to start automating things. So, for example, if you're running an app, for example, you could take some of the activity they do there and start triggering messages based off that. And also, you could start to pull in data from things like social media, for example. So there's services you can use where you can take someone's identity and email and try to append that to what's going on social, or you could just get people to give them their social identity if that works and isn't kind of creepy. That means that you could start taking the activity they do on social and start pulling that through into what you do in email. So hopefully not all of these things are going to apply to everyone, but I did want to just kind of pull out some of these things because these are pretty common things that people do, but they think there might be things that people haven't really thought of, and you might be looking at your database going, well, we only know someone's first name and last name and we don't know anything else. But in practice, you can actually find out quite a lot of this stuff and start tailoring really relevant messages off the back of it. So a fourth thing that I think is it kind of comes out of one of those pieces of data, really. So abandoned cart emails. So what can happen quite often is people send an abandoned cart email, and they send it because they think, well, someone added a product into the shopping cart, so they're obviously interested, but they're not interested enough to buy, so we're going to send them a quick discount. Now, depending on where you're at, this could be really smart. So you could be clawing back someone who's indicated they're interested, and you're going to give them a bit of discount to say, okay, cool. Well, you didn't buy that time. What about if I give you a little discount, and then would that help? Do you want to buy now? The flip side of that is if people get used to this, they might just go adding everything to their cart just so that they can see if you give them a discount. So I would say be smart about where you do discounts, and be considerate, and really you have to kind of perhaps test this and work out what works for your audience, and your region and all of that kind of stuff. There is no right or wrong here, but I thought this is quite interesting. The guy on there, by the way, is Ainsley Harriott. He's a sort of UK celebrity chef guy. So this is his Christmas jumper that you can buy. And the fifth thing that I wanted to touch on briefly, but I appreciate if you're not doing any of the other stuff, then that is the stuff to focus on. But there are new technologies that are starting to come up. So things like AMP for email, you may have heard of. It's a way to start to bring some interactivity into email. And again, this is a whole conference topic on its own. What's interesting is a lot of the discussion about AMP for email has been about, like, how can we put this into a really commercial context? And there's examples of like Airbnb or Booking.com or whatever being able to search for hotel rooms within an email. And that's cool. There's a lot of debate about, is it actually useful? But I think what we're overlooking is things like this. So this is an email that comes from Google Docs. And what's happening here is it's saying, basically someone's left a comment on a slide deck I was working on, and then someone else has resolved the comment, but I can reply directly from the email. So this is a lot less kind of sexy in terms of, it's not really marketing, but it's a great user experience benefit. So I can reply to a comment that's been left in the Google Doc without having to go into Google Docs. I can just do it straight from my email. So it's a lot more kind of utility based, but I think that's a lot of a stronger use case, to be honest. And this kind of stuff I think works really well in automated emails. So it might be, obviously depends on what's going on in your product or in your service or your brand or whatever, wherever you're at. But if there are places where you need users to interact with your organization in some way, and it could be something as boring as putting in the number on their electric meter or something like that, then this kind of technology could be really exciting to just make that make people do it a lot better, right? Because the easier you can make it for them, the more chance there is of them doing it. So I think this is an interesting technology to look over, but as I said, this is a whole conference topic in itself. So I just wanted to kind of flag it, really. And lastly, I just wanted to, I said it's a bonus, but really this is, I guess, number 6 out of the 5, is think about what you're doing in context of the real world. And this is an example that Airbnb sent, and I apologize to Airbnb for dragging this up. But this is something that happened in 2017, and this is a great email, right? They sent this out, and it's actually a marketing email, not really a transactional one. But they're saying, so the text is: floating world, how to spend a day or an entire trip without touching dry land. Your next aquatic adventure starts here. So what they're trying to do is publicize, or hopefully get you to book at some kind of floating, like a houseboat or something like that. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty quirky. It's really interesting in terms of what Airbnb do. The trouble is this email was sent in 2017, and unfortunately it was the same time that Hurricane Harvey had hit, I think it was Texas and Louisiana. So obviously they didn't want to do that. That wasn't intentional. This is completely a mistake, an honest mistake, but it is something to be aware of, especially these days. If you think about what's happened in the last couple of years, not only on a global level, we should be thinking about this kind of stuff, or a regional level or a country level or whatever, but we should be thinking on a personal level as well. What is going on in someone's own life could be related to COVID. It could be related to any other kind of circumstance that comes from COVID, or just, you know, and anything else that's going on in their lives, we should think about how our email is impacting and how is it going to land. So obviously that's quite a broad topic, but thinking about the language, perhaps, maybe even being upfront and saying, hey, we sent you this email because of this, you know, and having that kind of stuff in the footer, because if it doesn't land correctly and it doesn't work for people, then at least we're explaining that it is an honest mistake rather than something that's just kind of, you know, looks vindictive or something like that. And also just being aware of world events, you know, keeping an eye on things like social media, seeing what's going on, and perhaps being a bit more, I guess, happy or willing to stop an email if it looks like it's going to cause issues for people. And of course, you know, when you're sending automated emails, you need to be across what you're sending so that you can then see what's going on and you can understand quickly how you need to act. So that takes us to well, the end of my kind of 5 points and a bonus one, really. But hopefully that's useful. I think automated emails are a really, really strong way to get a huge amount of value out of the email channel, which is a channel that can deliver a lot of value with some work, but less work than you need to get out of other channels, for example. So I think email's really well placed to do this, and hopefully those are some ideas on where you can take your automated emails next. So with that, if you have any questions or anything, then I'm interested to talk more. Thank you.
Great keynote, Elliot. Okay, keeping up with the EMMS 2021, we are going to be with some questions that we have from the audience. And the first one would be, what is the criteria we should have to have high converting automations?
Okay, so a lot of what we kind of covered, really, I think, is some of the criteria that you should be looking for. The one thing I would think about is high converting. So obviously we do want to make everything high converting, right? But sometimes it doesn't need to have a massively high converting rate to be useful. So sometimes if for example, your abandoned cart email has fairly low conversion, but it's still driving something, then that's still doing some work and still adding some value. So I wouldn't worry too much about like everything's got to be 100% valuable. But that said, you know, obviously it should be for the right person. Yeah. So in terms of criteria, like I think really very broad, but what's useful for people, like, and we do have signals and we have ideas, but also put yourself in the place of the customer and think about how can this, you know, if I was buying this thing or using this service or whatever it is, how could this be useful to me? And then make a list and work out what's the most effective.
Okay, next question. We have someone who asks, how do we make marketing automation work when there's so many teams working towards the same goal? How do we make it happen? Is there any guidelines or any tips about it?
Yes. So this is a good question because I work with quite a lot of very complex, disparate brands, and they do have this challenge. So I think one is communication with everyone who is responsible for sending email. It doesn't mean that everything has to be done by the same person, but making sure that everyone who's involved is aware of what other people are doing. One fairly straightforward way to do this might be to set up a distro list, so that not only you can share your work with people, or maybe a Slack channel or something like that, but also you could set up some kind of dummy subscribers, so that anyone, if you had like a Gmail inbox or something like that, who is a kind of pretend subscriber, anyone in your team could jump in and see what type of emails that person has received. So you get a bit of an understanding of what it's like to be a user, really. And apart from that, the kind of user experience, then thinking about like how is stuff documented in the tools that you use, make sure that it's consistent, make sure that everyone understands you name things properly so that everyone can understand what different email campaigns are and that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you very much, Elliot. It's been great to have you here in the EMMS 2021. People from all Latin America and from Spain and even from the States are watching you right now. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for joining us, and yeah, hopefully we'll get out and see you soon in some way. So if you're around, come and join me on social. I am Elliot on Twitter, and yeah, I'll see you soon. Thank you. Cheers.